I think that should all be working, which is pretty cool.
Cool.
So Miles, why don't you just introduce yourself and you just tell us about like where you're at with your like med journey, and then yeah, like what stage you're at, and go from there.
Yeah, awesome. So, first of all, thanks for having me on. So I'm currently halfway through second year at Notre Dame University up in Sydney. And so for me, that looks like 2 years pre-clinical up there and then 2 years back in Melbourne, where I'm originally from, doing placements and everything. But I've been loving it so far, and it's been a lot of fun. So yeah.
That's awesome. But it wasn't like the typical like journey into med. Like, I mean, we obviously like went to school together. I remember talking to you like a few years back. Like I think it was like during like footy or something. You were, doing your thing, and you're like, I always like wanted to like get into med, but I'm not sure
Mm.
like what it's gonna look like or anything. So it's kind of cool. Like, I don't know if you remember that conversation, but I was like, when you eventually got in, I was like, that's awesome that that conversation happened, and then now you're here doing it like what you actually want to do.
Yeah, it's funny because I think at school, at least, I never really entertained it as a strong possibility. Just because I hadn't done enough research and I didn't really know what it looked like, and it was always sort of the brightest of the bright that I thought, okay, well, they're guaranteed to do it. And then um, for me, I was always interested in like that combination of working with people and then sort of academia, but then also I liked hospital environments, and I think that's where I kind of hadn't completely dismissed it once I started working as a physio, but I definitely had this side sort of interest or passion of like, oh, maybe what about medicine? And it wasn't something I probably sort of really started to like that passion or that sort of interest started to grow until maybe when I was like early 20s, where I thought, oh, actually, if I'm going to be working till I'm 65 plus, I want to give something a good crack. So, yeah, there was definitely the foundational interest there early, but I probably didn't really act on it until a few years into working as a physio.
It's kind of interesting. Like, do you think that school or anyone like in particular like dissuaded you from doing medicine because it's associated with people getting like the A pluses all the time, and
Yeah,
it's not the case. Like, you can do medicine from just getting like average grades, and it's not like
yeah,
that sort of thing all the time.
absolutely. Yeah, I don't know if anyone like would have has strongly dissuaded me, or even like the obverse of it, like really encouraged me to do it. Because I think, um, as you're probably aware as well, like medicine's very heavily romanticized. Like I think people forget about like a lot of the disadvantages or the hard parts of it. So I think um, for me, it was a case of I was always pretty cognizant and aware of it, and that's why I didn't really wasn't too tunnel visioned with my process. I thought, look, if I can get in, that's fantastic, but if not, it's not the end of the world by any means. And then I even remember when I got the interview, because I think I only applied twice, and I thought I'll give it a crack, and then I just want to be sitting at a pub when I was 50 thinking, oh, I could have done that and I didn't try. And then I remember getting the email and saying that I was in, and it wasn't, weirdly enough, it wasn't like I was obviously very happy, but it was also a case of, okay, is this something I still absolutely want to do? Because it's such a big pathway, and I could just see that I was just going to go down one trajectory, and it meant pretty quickly there was a lot of sacrifices early on that I had to make with like moving into stage, like giving up a full time job. Had just bought a house as well, so like all these weird factors to come into play. But yeah, I think I can safely say it was the best decision I've made, to be honest.
That's awesome. And I guess just for everyone, like, do you want to walk us through like your pathway from school to like getting into physio, and then eventually from physio getting into medicine?
Yeah. So I did a undergrad physio at La Trobe, which was like a Bachelor of Applied Science, Masters of Physiotherapy practice at La Trobe University in Bundoora, and that was excellent. I don't think for me I ever had the massive, when you sometimes meet people and they're just so absolutely dedicated and like devoted to what they want to do. I always liked it, but for me it was never going to be my absolutely everything. Like I was very interested in health, fitness, and like working with people and like an older demographic as well. But it wasn't always something I was interested in. And then I guess I finished that 4-year degree, and then I started working in hospitals pretty much straight away. And it was there that I really started to, I guess, enjoy hospital life, like being amongst like a multidisciplinary team, working alongside doctors, and very quickly I was like working in ICU, which I really enjoyed. And then pretty much across my whole, I've been physio for about 5 years now. I've pretty much dabbled in everything, which I really enjoyed. But it got me to the point where I was doing other random jobs. Like I started going to private practice, and I did a bit of work health and safety consultancy stuff. And very quickly, I found that I was doing a lot of variable things, but I still wasn't completely satisfied or challenged. And I think for me, it was a case of I love physio and I still like working in it now. But if I hadn't got into medicine, I was looking at going down a pretty different pathway again, just to shake things up.
And like, I know that just anecdotally, like physios and other allied health people in the hospital setting, especially the public space, maybe get a little bit overworked, underpaid. It's not as attractive as the private sphere for like all that stuff. I don't know if you sort of found that working in like the public system as a physio. Like, did you like feel like, oh, I don't have as much autonomy as I want. I don't have
Yeah.
the hours, or I'm just getting a bit burnt out and feel like I need to either change my role in the health system, or is it like I just need to get out and go into private practice? Because I know a few people who do that.
Yeah. Yeah, I think like it's hard because I think what people forget, and even it's funny, like even amongst our sort of circles, people forget that like physios have a role in hospital sometime, and you basically come out with a quasi medical degree. I mean, the amount of stuff I had to know from a medical standpoint just to be safe and competent in the hospital, and then you start working, and I think by and large, physios are pretty intellectual people, and I think the overarching sentiment amongst a lot of us was that you're not being fully utilized like your absolute capability. So it was a sense of like it was great, but then also I wasn't able to do as much as I'd like, and it wasn't as exciting as it could be. And then I'd start to look at some of the junior doctors doing some other interesting things. I guess obviously there comes with it a I guess with the more exciting and challenging roles, like the greater increase in accountability. But yeah, for me, it was, I think, just trialing private practice just to see what it was like. And I definitely think it was a really positive experience. But yeah, I think it was never going to, I think for me, I just couldn't work in a room. That's what I realized very quickly.
It's sort of fun, right? How you get into the hospital system, and I almost view it in terms of like a game at some points. I remember working for the first time as like an intern, and you're like running around, like you need to do all these different jobs, you need to consult 5 specialties, you need to get all these radiology scans like sorted, and you need to get discharges and scripts done, and it's like you're running all across the hospital to get everything sorted. um there's It's sort of fun. I don't know if that's the right word to use, but you sort of get it's attractive, that sort of uh frenetic pace of work.
it's like an organized chaos. And I think I liked the idea of you have to walk into a patient room and within a few minutes you have to like own that space, talk to them, and then you're going to be able to relay, information to a nurse or someone you've never met before, and then it's just like this really nice, like you're going to be switched on the whole time, which in of itself is very tiring. But I think I'm the personality that really like thrives off that as well. So I think that was my initial sense of, I guess, two pronged in the sense of, oh, I like this environment, but also I got a bit of a sense of what it was like for the doctors there as well, and gave me a bit more of an insight before making the decision to start studying it.
Did you ever have like any like bad experiences with doctors interacting with you as a physio, or something that sort of like rubbed you the wrong way, or maybe if there was nothing like that, what what could like doctors like learn from physios, or how to interact with them better?
Yeah, it's tricky because I think um, there's probably, and you're probably part of that wave of that movement of like the younger generation coming through of doctors are probably a little bit less of the archetypal doctor who's pretty strict and talks down to people. I mean, they obviously still exist, but I think my experience is where that typically the younger doctors were easier to get along with and better to work with, and then there were some that were fairly stubborn. But even when I was like supervising students, and even now just talking with fellow like med students, I always try and say to them like none of it's ever personal, and even if it is like coming across as personal, it's just this case of just a byproduct of a really harsh environment. And there's definitely anecdotes I have where doctors snap at you or they say things or they demoralize you, but I think that's where the luxury of being a little bit older now as a postgrad, you can sit back and look at things and think, okay, it's not really a targeted attack at me. They're having a bad day, whatever it might be. We're all here. I heard like a really good quote by one of the consultants I used to work with, and he was saying how no one goes to work to do a bad job, and we're in healthcare for a reason. You're doing it for like some sort of greater good and looking after the person. So I think keeping that in mind, it sort of always reorientates your emotions back to that center point. And I guess to the other side of it, it's that idea that a hospital is just so many cogs in the big system. Like a doctor's only going to be as good as the nurses that are going to be able to assist them, and vice versa, like all those sort of things. So um, I think what I was learning a lot is that you can do a lot for others, and others can do a lot for you as well within a team and a healthcare team. And so, yeah, you've got to pick and choose how you talk to certain um, like doctors in particular, but by and large, it was, I think, pretty positive towards the end, as long as I knew it wasn't like personal attacks and open communications and things like that.
Yeah, 100%. I think when you first start out, like interns are literally the bottom of the bottom, and the sooner you make friends with your allied health members, the easier your job's going to be. I remember like one of the best, I reckon one of the best and most useful people to befriend as an intern is like the nurse in charge of the ward, but also the pharmacist as well, because you make that many mistakes doing your medications. The pharmacists look at you like, geez, what have you been learning for like the past like 4 years? And they are your best friends for a whole lot of the time.
Because would you
Um,
say, like during your, like with your studying and everything, do you reckon there was a good emphasis on all the other disciplines around you? Like, do you reckon there was a good, strong focus on like the broader picture?
yeah, like learning about the other services that the hospital offers. I guess to an extent, but it's more of a tick box sort of lecture. That's what it felt. Having said that, I don't think I think it's hard to capture that without actually working in the space day to day. And you're not going to know what a nurse does or how they work or how they function until you actually work there. And then you know that they have handover at 7 o'clock and your ward round starts at 7:30. So if you start at the same time, they're going to be like, crossing paths. And then you know that they have a meeting with all the other nurses in the ward or in the hospital across all the wards, and look at how many bed transfers are pending, how many people are in ED waiting to come up. So all this like different stuff that you don't know how their day works until you start working in the hospital, which is cool.
Yeah, yeah, no, definitely. I think that makes a lot of sense. It's like you can only learn so much from observing and like from a distance. It's actually once you're in there, just how much you pick up on. And it's even funny now, like just even studying for only not even a full 2 years. I look at so many things I did as a physio, and like things are occurring with like interactions with doctors or why doctors are doing certain things, and it's just like all these little gaps are just being plugged in now, and it all just sort of starts to make a nicer picture. So I think that sort of, and like that was the pitch I sort of gave with my interviews and everything, was just having that clinical baseline, I suppose, makes me, I think it was going to make me feel a lot more confident when it comes to rotations and just like even intern and junior years and stuff.
100%. And so how do you find it like when you're a physio and you're like, well, I sort of want to do this med thing?
Mm-hmm.
You had to work out like the entry tests and everything. And was there any like things you had to pick up, or because I know some people who don't do the traditional science or biomedicine sort of undergrad may need to do other subjects to fulfill like prerequisites for getting into a medicine degree. I don't know,
Yeah.
like, could you talk through like how you went about transitioning from a specialty into medicine?
Yeah, so I think fortunately for me, with physio, I think there wasn't necessarily any bridging requirement. So I had a pretty good, like we ticked off a lot of similar subjects, I suppose, even compared to like your biomeds and everything. So from that lens, it was actually pretty good and pretty seamless. I think the hard thing for me was probably more the GAMSAT, to be honest. Like I wasn't necessarily a massive like math science person at school. And so then having been, X amount of years removed from school, I think by the time I started doing the GAMS, I was probably 6 years out, 7 years out of school. Um, like I could write an essay, but some of the questions I couldn't do to save myself. So I think for me, that was the biggest hurdle. And then, like went through a few different resources and everything, but that was probably the biggest barrier for me. I think once I knew I could get an interview or use my portfolio, I felt like I'd have an okay chance. But yeah, the GAMSAT was just like, yeah, that was brutal. I think that prep.
How many times did you sit it in the end?
I think I sat it, I think two, maybe three times, and then I applied twice to get in, and I think I made it pretty clear to myself that how long's a piece of string? Like, what are my options after this? So I think I didn't really improve that drastically across the three GAMSATs, and I think that's just like how arbitrary it can be sometimes. Like it's just the luck of the draw a little bit, but yeah, sat it three times, gave it a pretty good crack, and then it's sort of funny because it gives you a bit of a delay between your results and when you start applying again. It's almost like a sobering up period. So by the time I'd already got the offer for an interview, I hadn't even really thought about it. Like I was already starting to think about the year ahead and like going back and doing other studies. So I feel like in a weird way, it's kind of a good system because it's allowing you to think about other things in life, and it's not sort of bang bang. Now you're in, or now you're not. Good luck. So yeah, it was very funny to sort of. I remember getting the emails like at work and thinking, oh, okay, now I've got to like start preparing for the interview, and it just happens very quickly. But yeah.
And how, so you like didn't have to do any prerequisites. The GAMSAT hurdle, you did try to improve. It's a very tricky test. I don't know if it's the best measure to select people for medicine or not. And then you got into the interviews. How do you find that sort of that whole process?
Um, yeah, challenging because I think in many ways I like being in a room and I think I can sort of talk to people relatively well, like face to face. But then staring at a small screen in a dark room wearing a suit and boxer shorts, I probably wasn't didn't feel as confident. But I think like as soon as that first minute or two went, then it was just in the zone, and then just you go into sort of a bit of a flow state, I suppose. And yeah, it was good though. I was managed to have a number of people around me to practice with who'd been through a similar process or similar medical interviews in general. So that was, I think, quite important. And by that stage as well, I think I had the benefit of like every year with physio, I was applying for new jobs, doing different things. So I had a fair bit of experience with interviews in general. And I think that definitely held me in good stead, which made a difference. Yeah.
And is it like the MMI sort of thing for your Notre Dame interview where you have like it's about 8 stations, I'm pretty sure, and you go around and they ask you a bunch of questions. It's just online, right?
Yeah, just online. So it was 8 questions. I think they divvied it up, fit a certain way, but there was some bioethics. Like Notre Dame's very big on its bioethics, and then a few sort of kind of clinical type scenarios, and then I think there was a quote or an image, and then just a few characteristics about like why you, and then why Notre Dame, and everything. So yeah, it definitely was. It's always a bit hard to know. I feel like with interviews, you walk out sometimes thinking it's better to be like a little bit unsure rather than like, yeah, I think I did really well. I don't think I've ever had that in an interview before, particularly with a blank screen. But yeah, it wasn't too bad in the end. I think I was just happy to see what happened. I think, yeah,
Yeah. And I guess like you're in your second year at the moment in
yeah.
med. How have you found it like compared to like the physio degree and I guess maybe more broadly like there's other people from like, might be pharmacy or they might be like a social worker or nursing and they want to like do med. They can maybe be a bit intimidated by like the
Mm.
whole curriculum and stuff. I guess you could probably, say like it's just like anything else, but I mean, how have
Yeah.
you found it?
Yeah, I think to be honest, I reckon the hardest thing about going back hasn't been the content. And I think this goes back to obviously you're learning some pretty interesting and challenging and stimulating content, but it's been identical to physio in so many respects. Like it's very like that whole like problem based learning and trying to work in your clinical reasoning skills. Like I'll never be interested in the nitty gritty biochem, cellular stuff or histology stuff. Like it's interesting to a point, and then I kind of get more focused on the other thing. So I guess in essence, the people that have had some sort of like previous hospital experience or even just clinical experience, whatever it might be, are still like miles ahead as well. Like I've got like in my cohort, for example, there's a number of people who were doing law before this, and some people doing like one was a piano teacher. Like there's a very interesting array of people, and I think that's kind of the beautiful thing about medicine. It's not someone who is like the gun chemist or gun physicist. It's just if you can think a certain way, you can entertain lateral ideas. And even my course has a handful of people who have done nursing, and I think there's definitely the sense though, like you get a bit like for me at least, going back to uni was probably the transition effect. So having had that time working and then going back to uni life and living off like 2 minute noodles and instant coffee, which is probably a good diet for maybe like a day. And then like that was probably the biggest transition, to be honest, rather than the content itself. Yeah.
And so for like Notre Dame is based in Sydney. From my understanding, it's based in Sydney for the first 2 years, and then potentially you have the option of coming back down to
Mhm.
Victoria rather than
Yeah.
or just staying in New South Wales for your third and fourth year. Is that sort of how that works?
Yeah, they've got a few because there's also Notre Dame Freo as well. So then Notre Dame Sydney, you get the opportunity to go to some rural allocations as well within New South Wales. They've also opened up spots to go to Adelaide. Melbourne's one of its biggest clinical schools, and then you can obviously stay in Sydney, like metro area. And then I think there were some conversations around Queensland at some point. So there is a lot of options to move around, and I think that's why it's like of my 120 in the cohort, I reckon there'd be like 50 to 60 who aren't Sydney based. So I think that's why there's such an attraction to Notre Dame Sydney in particular. I guess the other consideration is when people are applying is to think about like, where am I willing to go interstate wise? Like, where do I actually want to live? And like, would I be happier here or what's the option? And I think people forget that like Notre Dame, you can actually come back to Melbourne if you're Melbourne based and or whatever you want to do. Whereas if you're going to another university, you're there for the whole degree.
It's an interesting consideration point because it's often not what you want to do or whatever. It's like where do you want to live and where do you want to actually
Yeah,
like spend your life? And
yeah,
if you really want to get into medicine and you really want to become a doctor and do all that thing, it shouldn't really matter where you live. But some people are like, oh, I sort of want to do it, but only if it's in Victoria or only if it's in Queensland.
yeah,
And it's like you really have to
absolutely.
like question like, what you want.
Yes, and I think like that for me was probably the best early on sacrifice. Like even before starting to work, you're like, okay, I'm already leaving behind friends and family to go study somewhere else. Like that, in a sense, is already a pretty good dipping the toe in the water experience. And Sydney's still very close, and I can still make it back and forth. But yeah, I think that for me was a really nice time in my life to switch it up, change it out, and get away from a bit of a potentially a bubble in Melbourne. And when you come back, it's the truest thing. Like nothing ever really changes. And so there'll be no doubt that like if I want to do some sort of rotation down the track, like, and it's 6 to 12 months, whatever it might be. Like that time flies by. So yeah. Have you ever thought about going to state, like, or you just go where the opportunities?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting consideration. I think early on it's easy to move around a bit, but when you sort of start to think about your specialization, because it's like sort of an interesting thing, right? If like in Australia, similar to like the UK, very different to the US, where you're not actually specialized at the time of graduation from medical school. You have to specialize after. And I don't know if you've put much consideration into like what sort of area you want to go into, but you sort of need the first few years to like sort of figure it out. And then once you start being like, oh, I want to go down this pathway, then making the right contacts and everything, you sort of have to stay in the one place. I think it's very tricky to get onto a training program if you don't have the right references and the right support networks in place. And that's only built based off time and reps and knowing, liking, and trusting someone, right? So
Yeah, yeah, and that makes sense. And I think like that's in so many respects, like probably going back earlier, it's like the appeal of medicine is that it is kind of, it takes the thought process out of where you're going to go and what you're going to do a little bit. Like it's sort of, you hop on the train gets off at this station, and you do that for a little bit, and then if you like it, awesome, stay with it, and then just follow that train that goes a different direction or whatever it might be. And so I think, again, like very cognizant of like the changes in the future. And it's funny, like you start to, in like our 20s, you already start worrying about like, okay, where would be like a good family life? Like, where do I want to do these things? But at the end of the day, like I think it's just rolling with the punches a bit, and like you'll make whatever work, I suppose.
100%. Have you thought about anything like that you'd want to do, or has anything piqued your interest? I know there's like lots of things in medicine, in like medical school, that I was interested in that I'm not interested in now. And
Yeah.
I know a couple of physios like they prefer like sports medicine or like orthopedics or anything. I don't know if you fall into that cliche or you want to do something different.
Oh no, I think everyone automatically pigeonholes me and says that I'll be working as an ortho bro. But I think having worked around enough of them, I mean, I admire them and I think it's fantastic. But I'm probably less inclined that way. It's funny. I think I've probably ticked off more so the ones I don't want to do, to be honest. Because again, going back to that whole idea of like things get romanticized, but I think you've got to look at like the least sexy part of some of the roles, like the 90% of what they're doing behind closed doors, and so I think in that way, I don't know. Some sort of physician training would be interesting, but I think as I increasingly become more like lifestyle focused or anything like that, like being a GP would be pretty fascinating. But what I have learned and what I know about myself pretty like overtly is just that like I always need some sort of change. I think like whatever I end up doing, I want to be able to mix it up and have some sort of variety to my week, and have scope to sort of change, and not wake up one day and think, oh, okay, do I really want to, like, was this too niche or whatever it is. So I think that's kind of the exciting thing for the journey ahead. I don't know, how about you? How quickly did you sort of decide going down like more the urology pathway?
Yeah, like it's tricky. I went down the same thing as you, like ruling out specialties. I think that's the way to do it. And you can do a little bit in med school, but hard to say until you actually get in the workplace. And some people like think along the lines like, oh, I have to like work in the specialty, like I have to do a neurosurge rotation to rule out or rule in neurosurge. I mean, you can just be in the hospital system for a couple of years, and you actually interact with that specialty, and you can sort of indirectly work out if you'd be interested in it or not. And I think in med school, I ruled out pretty much everything apart from anesthetics because that was the only one I had fun on. And then I started working, and then I did like urology at the end of internship, and I was like, oh no, this is sick. And like, it was really good fun. Got involved with like the team and like actually had some like, yeah, really good experiences. And I was like, let's just ride this wave, see what happens. And I actually never did an anesthetics rotation, so it's sort of interesting how it works out like that. Um, so what I would say is like it's funny how you can rule in or out things as a med student, but still have the open mind to what it's like in real life. You know,
What would you like advice wise, if you could transport yourself back to second year medical student Harry, what would you say to think more about or think less about or like do differently? Like, is there things you'd give back, like, or say to yourself now with all the knowledge you have and like actual experience?
I think at that stage it's tricky because you're overwhelmed by so much. In second year, at least for my med school journey, that's the first time you're in the hospital sitting. And it's like you're so overwhelmed by everything that's going on. You've got lectures, you've got exams, and you have no idea what this patient's here for. And you're asked to do a history and exam and go to a ward round. And you sort of like get freaked out and then you just go in the library and study. So I would say just be more like put yourself out there and in the deep end. And you might you may like not know anything about what an ECG looks like, but you're going to pick up every ECG you find on your cardiology rotation and try to interpret it. And then that's all you have to do. You just have to rock up and work out one thing to do each day, and it gets better over time. That's what I would do. Yeah,
Yeah, no, I like that. It's good advice. I have to write
yeah.
that down.
Yeah. No, no, don't write down anything. But
Yeah,
it's good fun being in the hospital sitting. It's better than being in the lecture theatre. I don't think
yeah,
you really understand or know how something works until you actually see it like in real life in
mm,
patient form. So
yeah,
it's good fun, you know. But I actually
yeah,
don't think GP is probably a bad idea. I mean, just hearing you talk about it and the way it sort of works, I think there was a GP who I did a rotation with, a placement with, and they actually had part of the year where they would be a locum doctor,
yeah,
and they would take their family for like a few months to like WA or Queensland or whatever.
yeah,
They would work for the first part and holiday for the rest. And they would also volunteer as an ED doctor, maybe
yeah,
a couple times a month. So there is like so much you can do as a GP, as
yeah,
well as like the co-specializations, like you can do like GP anesthetist or whatever it
mm,
is.
yeah.
It's really cool how you can do that.
Yeah, and I think like that's kind of it'd be interesting to see what the trend is like over the next 5 or 10 years and how everything goes, particularly with like rural GPs. But like I've still got a very strong interest like Indigenous healthcare and maybe a little bit more like remote and like regional health. So it's probably lends itself a little bit better to the GP stuff. But having said that, I definitely know that there's more like specialty training that's occurring in like rural areas to try and I guess incentivize people to go out there. So yeah, I think I'll be surprised either way wherever I end up. To be honest, I think I'm just looking forward to the journey, and yeah, at the end of the day, I think it'll just be fortunate to start practicing and start helping people and do things like that. So yeah,
Yeah, no, it's pretty cool, and it'll be interesting to see how your mindset changes as you start working as a doctor
yeah,
versus being a medical student. But it's kind of cool to see like the transition from like one like you know like you're going from like an allied health profession to like the
mm,
medical profession, and when you start working, I know like I work with people who were previously physios or pharmacists or nurses or whatever, and they just offers like so much different perspectives. It's kind of cool how it works.
yeah. And I think I wonder again, like, just there's so much to be said about having a little bit of a exposure, and it's not that everyone has to go now and do undergrad pharmacy or undergrad physio before they do med or anything, but I think it definitely bridges that gap and maybe potentially that shock to the system you do get when you start working in the hospitals. And it's kind of the funny thing about like what people perceive medicine to be and then what it actually is a lot of the time. And it probably doesn't get spoken about enough, maybe, particularly for younger people who are studying pretty aggressively for the GAMSAT and everything. So that was something that I was always trying to be very big on was that there's pros and cons to everything. Just make sure you're happy with the cons. And yeah, Yeah. So I remember like when was it? I think the last GAMSAT I sat would have been must have been 2021 sometime, I think. I can't remember exactly, but that was pretty like I love a challenge. So like and it was a bit of a grind. So it was like up early, studying for the GAMSAT, go to the hospital, come home, study for the GAMSAT, and that was pretty much on repeat for I don't know, months. But and maybe it wasn't the most effective way to do it, to be honest. But like that's kind of how I was doing it. And it was pretty hard to juggle all of that. But I, I think ultimately I always had that mindset of I'm going to give this a crack. I'm going to give it a proper crack and see what happens. And then if I get in, great. If I don't, that's still great. Like I'm still pretty happy and have great family, friends, and all that sort of stuff. So um, yeah, I try to empty the tank a bit there. And then right now I'm still working as a physio, so I do a little bit of work in a hospital up in Sydney, and it's very I don't know what your experiences were, but I think being a med student, you do surprise yourself how much spare time you do have. If you're pretty efficient, and again, I think just coming from a full time experience, working wise, you do just learn to cram more into your days and free up days as well. So yeah, doing a little bit of physio work, but such is the way of government payment systems. You can't work too much before they start taking any credit away from you.
It's a good income stream to have that work as a specialist and be able to study. And then I don't know, I think it just takes off the pressure of you like trying to look for like a part-time job in like some hospital area or whatever.
Yeah, I think it's probably the other thing I'd say is a lot of people don't think about like to that point earlier. Like I'd love to be a doctor in this suburb and like have the hospital just down the road, or study only at this university. I think it's really important for whoever's like applying or what they're looking at medicine wise to think about what the existence looks like. Can you actually financially do it as well? Because that's a big stress. And I know a lot of my friends at uni at the moment, they've got partners that are helping support them and families support them. But not everyone has access to that, so it's really something to challenge as well. So hopefully, I think there's some sort of government scheme coming in at some point, maybe for med students getting paid on placement. But
Heard something about nursing students and physio students getting paid, but when I was listening to that, they didn't include med students, so I wasn't sure why.
nah. So I think they've just ticked it off in New South Wales, I think, and I don't know why it hasn't been extended to medical students, but yeah, who knows? Hopefully, it's something they look into because it is tricky to work and juggle everything sometimes. What did you do for work when you were studying?
So when I was in undergrad, I mean, it was primarily like tutoring and coaching, which I was lucky enough to be able to do. I mean, both are pretty good, high income, low hour jobs. So you're getting lots of bang for your buck for when you actually were working. And I wanted that because I couldn't take a whole day to do an 8 hour shift slash didn't want to do that. I'd rather do 2 or 3 hours and get paid the same amount for a whole day's work or potentially more. Kind of cool. Uh, I should do a video, and I have thought about it in the future of specific casual or part-time jobs for students or med students or physio students or whatever it is.
Because I was going to say, like, even not sure what it was like when you were studying, but like I know our university is pretty good at getting the senior students to tutor the younger students as well. So they do offer some paid roles as well, but it is very tough because you've got all of a sudden, let's just call it 120 people now all looking for some kind of part-time casual job. There's only so many like, medical admin jobs or receptionist jobs or whatever there might be. So I think that's probably definitely other benefit. Having like a skilled profession beforehand has made it more comfortable. But yeah, it is tricky to get right. I reckon that would be a good podcast if you can do it. Get sponsored by Airtasker or something like that, and get up a list of jobs.
Wow, this is an idea generation. We need to go offline and
Yeah,
talk
I was
more.
going to say we're going to patent it somehow. Yeah,
I think it's kind of I had the additional benefit of living at home at the time I was
yeah,
studying, but it's maybe not the case for a lot of people, especially if they're coming from different backgrounds and not the cookie cutter
yeah.
model high school into med or high school into undergrad science into med, and they come from different areas. They've already got a family. They've already got, a full-time work. They're out of home. They're not in, like your case, you're in a different state, you don't have that luxury.
Yeah. It is tough. And I think that's where there's going to be probably more support put in place for students, I think, because ultimately less stressed medical students is going to benefit probably most of society somehow indirectly in the long run. Like, I think that's kind of, if we're going to be championing the right people, it's, you look after your teachers, you look after your nursing staff, and you look after everybody. But it's, I think it's really important they start to look at that a bit deeper as well. But that's more politics talking, I think.
Have you been on much placement already this year as a
Yeah, what have I done so far? So I've had a few throughout first year. Had a GP placement pretty much. I think it was once a fortnight, which was really cool. So that was just a nice opportunity to just sit in on a few things, get a lot of things wrong, which is always helpful for the confidence. And then a few like rehab consultant type sessions as well. And then they're trying to get us a little bit more exposure with like VSP, like actual patients coming in for all our OSCEs and examinations. So doing that a little bit more regularly. But otherwise, to be honest, there's probably not a whole lot. And again, I think that's probably the hurdle a lot of people will find jumping to third year next year is just, okay, wow, this is a hospital, and okay, the nuns there, I'm going to be best friends with them, and like a stand here, don't say that, say this, and all those sort of things. So I think for some it'll be a steep learning curve, but yeah, most of the stuff or the interesting stuff starts like early next year.
That's cool. So it's like 2 years sort of mainly non-clinical theory, and then 3 and 4 are the clinical years. Are you going to come back to Victoria to do your clinical stuff?
Yeah. So I come back pretty much like I'm done in, 4 or 5 months, and then I'll be back start of next year to do placements for a year. And then I got in to do rural placements in Ballarat for a year in my final year. So that'll be good exposure again. Pretty cold, but that's all right. And then, so I'm looking forward to it. Like time goes very quickly. I think you probably had the same thing when you told people you're going back or you're studying extra or whatever it is. But, all up, I will have spent 8 years at uni. And for me, that's probably going to give me a lifetime of options and different things and exciting things to do, I suppose, and a massive HEC step, which is great.
Yeah, hopefully they wipe it or something. I saw something ages ago. If you do a bit of rural, especially if you're interested in that, they will actually wipe your HEC stat if you work for a certain number of years. I don't know if you know anything about that or not.
Yeah, it's all like zones. So I think like depending on the zone of like rurality that you're in, they'll wipe off X amount. But yeah, if I end up taking that debt to the grave with me, that's okay.
Well, that's the good thing about it, right? It just disappears if you
exactly. Yeah. Hopefully not anytime soon, but yeah.
If you had your time again, would you do anything differently, or like would you have? I don't know. Like you sort of think, should I do medicine or whatever later on? But if you did you say you had that thought early on, but maybe you felt like it was for the smarter people?
Yeah, I think it was that. It was that idea of like, I had never really entertained it or been looked as a person who should do it or could do it. So for me, it was kind of like I would like to do it, but I think I wrestled with it for a while about my intentions behind it. Like, why do I actually want to do medicine? Is it because I'm not liking physio that much, or is it because I actually really want to do medicine? Am I fully aware of like the pros and cons? So I think I grappled with that for a few years, and then it's almost like it becomes a bit of a statement, because I think once you say to people, oh yeah, I'd like to get into medicine, now you've just made yourself accountable to it somehow. So I think I always shied away from it and didn't talk about, like, it's good and bad, because it's like you tell people you're going for a driving test and you come back and you don't have your license. They've put two and two together that you're not a very good driver. So I think there was probably that element to it, to be honest, where I was a little bit like, once I say yes, I'm going to give it a crack, I'll give it a proper crack. Would I change anything? Like, not to get too philosophical, but I kind of feel like I'm here now, pretty happy and no real regrets. And there's maybe one or two things I'd change and do differently, even beyond like getting into medicine. But I think that's just kind of like the beautiful thing about you live and you learn, a few errors. But I do think there's something to be said around taking your time to get in, and also that doing post grad and being a little bit older. So I was 20, what was that, 26 when I started. Like, isn't a bad thing. Like, I've come in with a lot more life experience than someone who's 21 or 22 or whatever it might be. And not that there's any probably difference outcome wise for like the doctor's age and when you start interning, but I think for me it was just the right time. So yeah. What about you? Do you sort of look back at your trajectory with things and studying path and change anything or do anything differently?
Um, I would get into med sooner, I reckon. If I could, I would have. I think most people would rather start working and earning cash earlier rather than studying for longer. You have more fun and you learn more when you're in the system. So if you could get in straight away, you'd do that. I would have done that, but I just didn't do well enough at the tests. Uh, is what it is. I think it's encouraging though, and reassuring, like hearing you say that sort of stuff, because there might be other like allied health people out there, or not even in the health sphere. I think I had um, some person get in touch with me who was, I think, in like the tech space, and they were also wrestling with the idea of doing medicine and potentially committing to a whole career in that, but they already
Yeah,
have a family and everything set up. Earning good money would be a massive impact on their current situation.
yeah,
And it's interesting to hear that it is like possible. There
yeah,
are sacrifices you have to make, but if there is that niggly feeling out there for some people, you'd rather
yeah,
just go and do it and have
yeah.
a red hot crack.
And that's the thing. I reckon, like, to give people a sense of just how diverse my cohort is. I think there's at least like a dozen parents in the cohort. One of my friends just gave birth to a beautiful baby boy like 2 weeks ago, like middle of exams, and then not middle of exams. That's probably too extreme, but and like all sorts of ages as well. Like, it's a real mix, and I think again, like, you probably end up regretting the things you don't do or don't have a crack than the things you do actually do. And obviously, it's a conversation when you've got more stakeholders involved with your family and stuff. But at the end of the day, like, we're going to be living till we're 150 with how longevity medicine's going. You may as well enjoy what you're doing or mix it up. And worst case scenario, you don't get in and you've still got a pretty good life. And best case scenario, you get in and you enjoy the roller coaster ahead.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. I guess we should wrap things up, but would there be any like advice you would um, give to maybe another physio out there, or maybe they're a pharmacist, or maybe they are some sort of like software engineer or something like that, who has this feeling like, oh, I want to do medicine, but I'm not sure if I'd be good enough or smart enough, or if I'd even be able to do it. Like, what would you
Yeah.
say to that sort of person?
I think the fact that, like, I can only probably speak directly to the physio about the intellect side of things, but as I said, physios are very smart people, and to try and get into those courses are pretty competitive. So I think from that perspective, like, they'll definitely be capable of doing it, and just even having that hospital exposure, or even just working with patients or whoever it might be, that really does make a difference. And I reckon as well, there's always this sense of, like, everyone's smart just in their own ways, and I think medicine itself benefits from different variations of intellect and different ideas brought to the table. So, like, with the range of people I know in my cohort, there's just so many different people from so many different backgrounds that have picked it up pretty seamlessly. And most courses, postgrad wise, cater to that. They cater to, basically, if you're an alien, you could come in and do postgrad med. I think it's designed, if you've got a certain competency and a certain approach to how you conduct yourself and your work ethic, definitely feasible. So I'd say keep giving it a crack, keep giving it a go, and for better or worse, like, the outcome will be there in terms of whether you get in or not. But at least you gave it a crack as well at the same time. So yeah,
Jeez, you're inspiring me already, man. That was awesome. Thanks so much for jumping on and having a chat. It was like really good to hear a perspective from someone who didn't come through the traditional sort of pathway into medicine.
Yeah.
So yeah, really appreciate that. And yeah, can't wait to see you start working in the hospital and maybe interact
Yeah.
with you.
Oh, absolutely. And I'm looking forward to it. Thanks very much for having me on. It's been a lot of fun. So yeah, I love talking with you.
All right, so that's the end of that conversation. If you want to be part of something like this, you think you have an interesting story in medicine to share, maybe it's how you got in, and maybe it's that you got on a different training program or you went through some adversity, that's something that you think you'd be interested in doing, then send me a message. The link will be in the description, how you can get in touch. If you know someone else that's probably keen to share their story, or you think that they would be a great person to share on this, then definitely link them in and we can get them on. If you want to stick around, there's plenty of other videos on here to check out and keep you informed, keep you interested, and keep you learning more about medicine. So there you go. Otherwise, we'll see you next time. Bye.